Welcome to Bring Out Your Badass Self, a movement to break your negative thoughts and habits and instead focus on building each other up and encouraging fearless authenticity.
Each week, we will get vulnerable and share experiences alongside our guests and audience. Come rediscover your inner badass self.
Good morning.
Good morning, badasses.
How are you today, Miss Sarah?
I'm doing well. I have to tell you, I feel like I am just immersed with badassery accessories. And so I have,
Yes.
we have our shirts. You gave us the badass necklace, and then we have a badass member that gave us these mugs that say, "Good morning, badass."
And they are amazing.
I know. I love the way it just fits your hand.
Yeah.
So
It's great. And you can turn it so that, if you want, you can have it say "Good morning, badass" to you. It's fantastic. I love it.
I know. Awesome.
With mine filled with piping hot tea this morning, so I have to be careful and not burn everything.
Don't burn yourself, please.
Right. No.
Mine's filled with lovely coffee.
Yes. Yeah. I jump back and forth all the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, I also just want to highlight for the group today that we have some upcoming topics that are already posted. So next week we will have Casey Ferguson, and this episode is called "Out of the Darkness." We previously recorded this interview, but it really touches upon so many of the past episodes that we've done. Inner critical thought, focusing inward. And then, of course, it's going to be focusing on today's topic as well, which is guilt versus shame. So we want to make sure that you be sure to go ahead and sign up for that. And then after that, we've already posted for our next one after that, which is on intuition. And that's actually one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. The interview with Casey is going to be awesome. People are going to love this. So
I think so too.
Yeah. So just a reminder, if this is your first time joining us, please let us know by posting a white heart. Also, if you are new entirely and if you are a Facebook user, you may need to give us permission with StreamYard. So just open up another tab, plop in the URL, StreamYard.com/Facebook, and then, you give them permission, and then from that point forward, we'll be able to see your lovely name rather than just seeing it as a Facebook user.
Yes. And so we definitely want to know if you are a first-time attendee. And so be sure to include that white heart as well. And I'm just including some information there for people just to remind them about that Facebook link, because last time we didn't know who some of those people were and we really wanted to say hello.
Yeah.
And speaking of saying hello.
Right. Good morning, Steph.
Good morning, friend. Awesome. And then we have Renee. Love all the badass stuff, she says.
Yes. Thank you, Renee.
It's so awesome. Well,
in general, guys, we would love to continue to share with others so we can continue to grow the movement. So if you could help us out and share, that would be awesome. The more badasses we have, the better.
Awesome. Well, today's topic is about guilt and shame. And the two often go hand in hand, and many times are common mental barriers that really impact our lives. And so Cate and I will discuss the differences between guilt and shame today, some signs of shame, common reasons for guilt and shame, and tactics to release shame.
Yes. And as always, we would love to be interactive, especially without, a pre-recording, which we'll be doing next week. So you kind of get a sense of how that feels, but we'd love to be interactive with you folks. So, and Sarah and I are going to be getting vulnerable as always. And if you feel inclined to share with us and the rest of the movement, please do, especially if something resonates with you.
Yeah. And so I'm going to say hello to Eric. He said, good, badass morning.
I love it. It's just so fun to say badass.
It really is.
Yeah. Yep. So. And badassery. That's been my favorite. That's been another favorite way I've been referring to it. Like badassery. Like a.
That's right. We have badassery accessories.
Yes. Yes.
Well, speaking of badasses, we actually have today's song of inspiration is an original. So Brock actually ended up deciding to write an original song for us today. So I am super excited about it. It is badass for one. I think so, yeah. And it also fits our theme for today. And so I'm just, before we get into that, Carrie says, recovering Catholic here. Bring on how to release shame.
I love it. That phrase, recovering Catholic, is one of my favorite phrases. I love it. I love the way I've had a few people in my life that have described their spirituality as such. And I just think it's great. And it reminds me of my own childhood and going to Catholic church with my grandma, but not quite getting it. But, it's a wonderful phrase because there can be so much guilt and shame in that, religion, especially from years back. And so I think a lot of folks are recovering. So thank you for sharing, Carrie.
Absolutely. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and play Brock's song. I also want you to know I am going to be posting some of the lyrics as well, since this is an unknown song. And for me, I always like to understand what the lyrics are. And so I'm going to go ahead and play it, and then we can talk about it afterwards.
I don't want to leave. I don't know what I was thinking.
I love it. I love these types of songs, upbeat songs. But if you really listen to the lyrics, I ended up posting it for everyone so they could really see what the lyrics were saying. And when you focus on even the last section, so, heat, ignition, liftoff, waiting to fall back down. Am I still a good girl? Am I the problem? I don't know what went wrong. Maybe something's wrong with me. When you think about shame, that's what people think about. What's wrong with me?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. It's gotta be me.
Exactly.
That's what you're thinking when you're in your shame space.
Yes. Anything else about the lyrics that stood out to you?
Oh, I loved it. I love I love the, I don't know what went wrong. Maybe something's wrong with me. I mean, I loved it. I really loved the way that the song started, and it was about kind of it's about the vulnerability in the beginning, about, being that how you were free before, and then,
Mm-hmm.
you're now kind of, you weren't able to hide. And so like, to me, the song is like, you get vulnerable, you then all of a sudden there's an issue, and shit, what if it's me?
Right.
And
Yeah.
but you do that all with Brock's beautiful voice and his amazing music. It's a fantastic combo. So I'm thrilled. This is maybe my 5th time listening to it, because
Yeah.
we just got it this morning. So I am a repeat listener. When I like something, I listen to it 700 times. So
It'll be the weekend song.
it will be my weekend song. Right. Exactly.
Well, when you really think about guilt and the differences between guilt and shame, guilt for me is when you think you did something wrong, where shame is when you think you are wrong. And
Yes.
so if you think about this song, it really goes through that, did I do something wrong to, oh crap, am I wrong? Is something
Right.
wrong with me?
Yeah. That evolution. So, there are times actually when guilt can be healthy,
Mhm.
but shame really never is. So, an example of a healthy guilt is if it's something that actually motivates you.
Mhm.
It could not feel good, but it could motivate you to act in a way that is good, right? So
Mhm.
if you are feeling guilt about something that makes you change, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, oh shit, I forgot this. I feel bad. I feel guilty. I'm going to hold myself accountable for it. And I'm going to sure as hell hope that this reminds me to not forget this in the future. Right. Like, that's an example of a healthy guilt.
Yeah,
I'm
or
sure. And
even
people go through this all the time.
yeah, exactly. When you think about healthy guilt is maybe you are taking some wrong actions in your
Right.
life and you really need to modify them. So, for example, if someone is drinking and driving and they're in an accident, then that's probably a healthy guilt.
Right.
So, you really should be reevaluating your life and the actions you have been
Mhm.
taking and reevaluate how you should modify that action.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 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 guilt, even though it doesn't feel good sometimes, can still, motivate us to do something good.
Yep.
Um,
Exactly.
and now, but there's unhealthy guilt, and um, a lot of the healthy guilt usually is about you, right? It's about something, a mistake you made. Now you're feeling guilty, and it can motivate you to change it in the future. But there's this concept of an unhealthy guilt, and I was kind of struggling with this when we were going back and forth, Sarah.
Mhm.
And what I realized is that a lot of the unhealthy guilt that you were talking about is really when you're feeling guilty about something you shouldn't feel guilty about. You're not necessarily in the shame spot where you're like, whoa, this is about my self-worth.
Mhm.
We'll talk more about that, like when, that's what shame really does to you. But um, tell me more a little bit about unhealthy guilt.
Yeah. So where I tend to see unhealthy guilt is uh, for about, I guess it's been about 3 years now. I've been a part of my page, which is sex positive. And I was
Mhm.
actually asked to be a part of a group for a period of time that was about sexless marriages.
Mhm.
And the person was in a sexless marriage. He wanted to start this separate page, but once he got into it, he was like, I don't know how to help individuals
Mhm.
related to this. So I ended up coming in and talking to people. And one of the things that I found is that there was guilt and sometimes even shame on both sides of a sexless marriage. So one side felt guilty that they didn't actually want to have sex. Like, what's, why am I dealing with this? Like, what's wrong with my libido? All of these different types of things that they were feeling guilty about. And then the other side was feeling guilt as well, because they're thinking, what's wrong with me? Why does this person not want to be with me? And so in those instances, a lot of times it's more of an unhealthy guilt, that sometimes it might be medical. Like, you might be dealing with something that you shouldn't feel guilt or shame about. It's something that you need to go take care of. And for the person in the other side, it may not be that other person's fault. They may be dealing with a medical issue. It may have nothing to do with you. And so a lot of times people really started to go into a guilt cycle of thinking that something was wrong with them, and feeling guilt about what it is that they weren't potentially providing.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in a lot of ways, it's about like, is this guilty justified, right? Like, you know, um, I think there's, in general, right, there's a lot of guilt and shame wrapped up in how we all think about sex. And for me, your example reminds me of my own past, and how, as kind of a reaction to the childhood sexual trauma I experienced, I was very promiscuous, and also, very not sober most most of my, I would say from age 14 to 27, and so it literally, I didn't realize until I was in my marriage, and monogamous, that like, that was actually the first times in my life I was having sex without being drunk, or being, or not sober, because
Yeah.
there are certainly some other things mixed in there at times. But so I had to go through this like kind of experience of figuring out, like, so because I wasn't used to that, I was feeling awkward, and then I was feeling guilty about it, and then I was feeling shameful, and I had to, like, the guilt kind of did shift down into shame, and we'll talk a little bit about a shame spiral. But that's kind of one of the problems with guilt. If you aren't able to kind of address it in a healthy way, it can move into a space of shame, where you move from like, ooh, I don't like this. I don't like the way this feels. I don't like how this happened. It can turn into, shit, it must be me. I must be the problem. There's something wrong with me, right? And so that's what happened with my journey around sex and sobriety. I had to circle back, get some more therapy, realize that it's perfectly okay that I felt awkward, but I needed to kind of embrace who I really was and find different ways to feel comfortable in that moment. Similar to people who are just entering their sobriety journey, and they want to maybe participate in social activities, but they have never done so without being wasted,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I want to circle back on something that you talked about. And so I want people to understand that it's not uncommon that when people experience childhood trauma that is related to sex, so some type of molestation or rape or whatever it might be, especially at an early age, that it's not uncommon for promiscuous, for someone to become promiscuous. And so one of the things that really bothers me is when people start to shame people for their actions, especially related to this, because cultural norms are, you wait until you get married, all of those types of things. And then a lot of times what those people are doing is, not only does this person have guilt and shame over what happened to them when they were little, like they feel guilt and shame over the fact of something that happened to them that wasn't even their fault.
Yeah, completely beyond their control.
And so I want people to like resonate with that. And then they're shaming them further for being promiscuous. Well, this person is still dealing with all of these things. That is an action that they're taking because they haven't figured themselves out and they're still dealing with those things. So I want us as a society to really think about, even sobriety and things like that. Most of the time when people are alcoholics, addicts, whatever it might be, they're just doing those things because there's some type of trauma that they still haven't dealt with. That's just an action they're taking to try to overcome how it is they're actually feeling, to not have to really deal with it.
Right.
And so, but yet people continue to sort of focus on shaming them, which really isn't helping the situation anymore. And I will say that even whenever it comes to like putting people in prison for, for drug addiction and all of these types of things, I understand if they've done something like murder or things like that.
Criminal.
But yeah, but things just related to like even drunk driving. Like if we catch someone drunk driving, they haven't killed someone, why are we not actually spending more time helping that person? And so I want people to sort of realize and give a little bit more empathy to those people and understand that your words are actually potentially making them spiral even more in what it is that we're saying to people.
Yeah, totally. I think there's so much intensity behind everything you just kind of mentioned and went through, but how wonderful would it be if we as a society could really kind of let go of some of our baggage and the things that we're trying to push onto other people and see it for what it is, like if there is a young female in your life that is acting promiscuous or giving you some other signs that may make you pause a little, maybe it's time to dig a little deeper and figure out what else is going on there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how we can help people. It's not by continuing to shame them. And I have to say that as we think about each of these areas, so, healthy guilt is an area where we're reflecting, we're taking an action to be able to better ourselves. Unhealthy guilt is really something where we have to release. I really shouldn't feel this way. And I think everybody sometimes goes through these types of things. Just a simple example is I accidentally sent a message that I didn't mean to send. I sent a birthday message to my friend Leslie. I also sent it because Todd, my other friend, has the same birthday. Well, I felt bad. I felt guilty. I was like, oh, I just did this and I just
called Leslie Todd.
Yeah, I just called her Todd for one, and I sent both of them and I felt guilty. I was like, I was trying to make her feel good. And I ended up not doing that. And so sometimes we have little guilt like that really is sort of unwarranted. You were trying to do something nice. So the unhealthy guilt is when you're doing something and you really shouldn't have guilt over those types of things. You may have made a mistake. That's okay.
Right.
And so,
but it's literally not something you should be carrying.
Exactly. And then shame is whenever it spirals into even more like I am not worthy of things related to things. And so I'm going to share a little bit of a story for me. When I was in 11th grade, I was still haven't really dealt with what happened to me whenever I was younger, being molested. And then I ended up in a relationship with a boy that moved into our town. It's the new boy in town that everybody's interested in, but it ended up not being a good relationship. And this person I was breaking up with them. And he ended up calling me, telling me that he was committing suicide, that he was taking pills and that he was going to kill himself because I was breaking things off with him. So I ended up going over there because the last thing that I wanted is me to not help this person out by them saying that. So I went over there and I said, well, if you have taken all of these pills, then I'm going to call an ambulance. And then he stopped me. No, don't do that. And I was like, oh, this person's playing me. Like I knew then that if he didn't really want help and the way he was saying it, he really hadn't done what it is he was saying. And
right.
So
like if had he reached out and needed help, then he would be following through on the help.
Exactly. And so I was like, look, I'm not going to deal with this. I started to leave, and he got so mad at me that he put up his fists like he was going to hit me. And I
Mm.
looked at him and said, don't you dare hit me, because I said, and if you do, I said, if I don't take care of you, my father will. And he stopped, and he ended up slamming his fist down onto my car, and I ended up leaving. Well, after that, I'm still reeling with all of these types of things. And
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this, how I'm going to, how things are going to change. And I'm just reeling. I'm going down the shame spiral. And at that time, my sister then called me on the phone. She wasn't living with us. And intuitively, she called me, and I answered the phone, and I just broke down on the phone, and she was like, "What is going on?" And I told her that I was having thoughts of suicide. And she was like, "I'm going to call mom and dad." And so she did. And I ended up going in for a month-long therapy, which was really one of the best things for me, to really get through, uh, deal with a lot of the things that I really hadn't dealt with.
Yeah.
But you can imagine all of these different types of things. Once you get to a point where you're really feeling helpless, that's really where shame tends to come into play.
Yeah. Yeah. That's more than guilt. That's right. That's a deeper seated thing that has to do with, your whole self-worth.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry you went through that.
Yeah.
It sounds like the
I know.
the aggressive part sounds terrifying. But I'm really glad that you were able to share that with Carrie, that you were able to be vulnerable. I'm glad that she called you and
I know.
knew, right? And it's a perfect example of when people do get into that really dark space and they are able to reach out.
Yeah.
um, how much it can help to have people you love take the reins for a minute. Like,
Yeah.
you may not want to be telling your mom and dad that you're feeling suicidal. No one wants to tell people that they
Right.
love that they're feeling in that dark, but you were able to get the help you needed.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think for me, one of the ways that I really have been able, we're going to talk a little bit more about releasing shame, but one of the things that stood out to me is, some of the things you said to me is that I have come out about pretty much everything,
Yeah.
that I've gone through, and I see it for me as empowering.
Right.
And not everybody gets there.
Mhm.
And then, I know, Kate, that was something that you sort of struggled with as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, we've known each other for now like 7 years, right? And I remember early on, we were connecting and we did have this mutual connection. We had this similarity between us in terms of this childhood trauma, right? But and so we were able to talk openly with each other about it. But then as I got closer to you and kind of, was observing you out in the wild, and
So wild.
yeah, right. You know, you were able to talk about that in a public platform. And this was before the Me Too movement, right? Then the Me Too movement happened. And then you continued to do this, right? So for my own evolution, I remember thinking and I remember expressing to you, like, I'm not where you're at. I can't quite be public about this stuff yet. Um, and when you and I talked and like looked back, what was really kind of driving that, was was shame and was fear that people would look at me differently. I don't want anyone pitying me.
Right.
And it's funny how when you are in the depths of shame, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more of a concrete way, but I think these stories kind of help you
Hmm.
set things up, right? They kind of help you see the picture sometimes more clearly. But when you're in the depths of shame and you're feeling so negative about yourself, you actually often go to a place where you are looking for things to convince yourself that your inaccurate, horrible feelings about yourself are true.
Mhm.
So for me in the Me Too movement, as an example, so all of these people are posting things about their sexual abuse. And I as a person who is intimately involved in this, you know, issue, I was so glad to see it. You know, I wanted the destigmatization to happen, you know, like
Mhm.
I was on board. But also I was watching because I was fucking afraid to do this, right? So I was watching, and as these people would put these stories out on Facebook, and others would interact, and they would be interacting in like this really supportive, amazing way, and they would say things like, "Wow, I never knew you had been through this," or "I'm so glad you shared this. I can't imagine the pain you felt." That is like, those are some of the very right, appropriate responses, right? Me and my shame spiraling at the time was like, okay, well, yeah, I'm super glad this is happening. Good for society. But look right there. That person that says, wow, I didn't know this could happen to a person like you. For me, I was like, well, there it is. There's my evidence. They're thinking differently about that person. So, you know, all these fears you have, Kate, about opening up and
Yeah.
being vulnerable publicly, um, it's going to come true. All the things that you are catastrophizing and thinking, you know, people will feel differently about you. They'll pity you too much. And that will be so awkward and uncomfortable. You know, here I was
Mhm.
able to take really loving, positive statements and turn them into bullshit in my head that reinforced all this, you know? And I know that we all do that. And I think
Mhm.
you can't always see it when you're doing it, but if you can become aware, you know, you have a better chance of being able to see it in the future. And then the hindsight is helpful too. It's okay if you do have a little bit of shame spiraling, as long as, you know, later you can look back and say, shit, I'm going to try not to do that again.
Right. And so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I
Yeah.
want people to think about this as we continue to talk through this. So shame needs three things. Those three things are silence, secrecy, and judgment. And so when you really think about what Cate just said as an example, she was not silent with me. It wasn't necessarily a secret with certain people, but it was still something that she kept from other people because she didn't want them to know about those things because she was also afraid of the judgment and those types of things. And this really goes back to something that happened with Gina within our company whenever I did my personal information on our website about us. And I ended up saying something about what it is that happened to me. And I remember her son telling her, he was like, wow, like, really? She told people this stuff about her? But when you
Mhm.
think about it, once you get to a point that you don't want to keep it silent, you don't want to keep it a secret, and you're not worried about the judgment, you have ultimately just released all of your shame and guilt because
Right.
now it becomes empowering because I'm not going to allow this, whatever it is, to control me.
Right. Right. Being able to talk about it publicly is one of the biggest signs that you know it wasn't your fault, um, or you know the most aspects of it, um, need to be released from your own self-worth, that you didn't
Yeah.
that this doesn't have to define you anymore, and you don't have to be afraid of other people's judgments.
Yeah.
You just don't have to fucking listen to them. You
So
know,
let
if
me
you
ask
do
you
perceive
this.
them as judgments, you know?
So let me ask you this. We have people that are listening that still are keeping things secret, and they might continue to keep things secret. But can you tell them how it is that you felt the moment that you decided you didn't want to keep this a secret, you didn't want to keep it silent, and you didn't worry about what other people thought about you? How is it that you then felt before and after?
Yeah. So, great. Great thing to think about, honestly. So,
Mhm.
in the moment, it was still terrifying.
Mhm.
you don't just make this decision to come public, and because you haven't done it before, you still have no idea what it's going to feel like after. So you're
Right.
scared.
Right.
That's the definition of fear. I don't know what's coming in and I'm scared,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for me, I had this desire to take the leap. I had people around me like you that said, "Hey, I'm on the other side and it's not so fucking bad. Come join me." So I I decided to take the leap even though I was scared and I was acknowledging that fear. And then afterward, what a release. That's the point. That's the part that makes it worth it.
Yeah.
The release, the ability to just let go of something that is shaking you to your core, that has made you feel like you are less of a person, and you didn't want to feel less than a person, but you still did. And then the ability to publicly say, this happened, and I'm better for it because I've grown,
Yeah.
and I want to help other people by hearing this story. And it's so relieving to just let it go and let it be out there.
Yeah.
I know that's sometimes not people's experiences. People can get vulnerable and then get trolled or things like
Yes.
that, but
Mm.
but in the ideal situation, when you are feeling safe and confident, you still feel the fear, you decide to do it anyway, and it can be a very beautiful release that's waiting for you on the other side.
Yeah. I do have to say that you have to do the internal work first. Like, you have to feel comfortable with yourself and with what you're about to release, because I have seen it go sideways because people haven't really done the inner work to feel, you know what? I have nothing to feel ashamed about. Until you get to that point, coming out public is probably not the best option.
Mhm.
And so I do want to
Right.
say that, because it can then spiral, as you were telling me with a particular story, a person that came out, but they really hadn't done the inner work. And then trolls were really like going at them. And then they ended up committing suicide
Yeah.
because they really hadn't embraced themselves in what it is that they were doing. So you first have to get to that point.
And this happens in our world about more than just sex and sexual abuse. We've
Yep.
mentioned, like, addiction and sobriety, but this happens about anything that is a tender, vulnerable topic,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you have been abused in any other ways, if you have felt abusive yourself,
Mm.
right? Like moms who have felt unreasonably or irrationally angry towards their newborns because they are having that horrible postpartum, right? Those types of
Yeah.
things are examples of things that can be talked about, that you had felt shame about. So it's more than just about sex, obviously, but these
Yeah.
are, that's kind of where this conversation led.
Yeah, I know. And that's
Yeah.
our experience. And so hopefully
Yeah.
people can correlate to things that have happened to them. So as an example, someone that's lost a child, like,
Mhm.
sometimes you are going to feel guilt about, what did I not do, those types of things. And sometimes that can also spiral even more into shame. And so
Right.
I would say that in most situations, that is probably an unhealthy guilt that then can spiral into shame, because
And
a
right.
lot of times there was really nothing you actually could have done.
Yeah,
And
that's like at the root of unhealthy guilt. It's really that it's not justified. It's not a justified way for you to feel about yourself, because it was not your fault. It wasn't your action, or it wasn't
Mhm.
your thought, or it wasn't your intention driving the boat, right?
Right.
And then when that unhealthy guilt turns into shame, that's when we have the real problems, because that's when we're attacking ourselves.
Yeah.
That's, that's more, that's worse.
Yeah. I would love to hear from anybody that, even it's about what we've said. Like, does it resonate with you? Is there anything that we've said? If you want to talk about things related to you, feel free to do that as well. And so maybe, Kate, let's get into, signs of shame. And so for me, there are really four different areas. There's emotions, there's thinking, there's behavior, and then there's also physical. So maybe we can start a little bit with emotions. So if I'm feeling how do you know that you're potentially feeling shame? What are some emotions that people might experience?
A lot of the negative ones, right? Like depression, anxiety, anger, jealousy. A lot of times, those are the secondary emotions, and the primary emotion is shame, right? But the secondary emotions may be up in your face, right? So you may be feeling really anxious or depressed or remorseful, but underneath it, shame could be driving the boat.
Yeah. And then we get into the thinking. And so a lot of times when people are feeling shame, they have a low self-esteem or low self-worth, or they're constantly thinking bad about themselves. And going back to our previous topic of the critical inner voice, a lot of those types of things. But I also want to point out a couple of others that people may not necessarily equate to the thinking of shame. It has to do with being a perfectionist or feeling that you have to be the best, and
Yeah.
you're not the best, and therefore you're a failure. So the thinking aspect of that. And so
Yes.
looks like Carrie has a comment. Shame for me is about things I've done. Guilt is usually what I should have done.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, because motivates you to change, right, and fix
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah, and so like those two aspects that we've covered so far, emotions and thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most interesting things I've learned in my therapy is that, one of those two things can come first. You can have an event, a prompting event, a
Mm-hmm.
trigger, a situation, or something, and it can cause emotions that then cause thoughts. It can also cause thoughts that then cause emotions. Um, you know, and kind of understanding the connection and the difference between the two. The
Mhm,
thoughts are the judgments, the interpretations, the things you're thinking, like, I'm not good enough. That's a thought. That's
mhm,
that's a shame. You're feeling shame causing you to have that thought, right?
mhm. And a lot of times the behaviors are
Ah,
really because you have shame too. So, for example, a lot of people will become an addict. That's a behavior.
it's a coping.
You might even blame others, or some of the typical ones, as you talk about, Kate, is really avoiding others or hiding and giving up. Or, my favorite is also the inability to say no. Like you feel guilty, or shame, I've got
Yeah.
to say yes. Like I have to deal with this. And I've also seen it where people have the inability to accept criticism as well, that they feel shame about it, and so they get very defensive about anything you say because they're triggered by
Mhm.
something that happened. There's
Right.
also people pleasers and approval seekers, and we deal with that sometimes even within our own company. It's like, hey, you don't have to feel I know this is something you dealt with, related to your mom, for example. You stop being a people pleaser. Like, set
Mhm.
boundaries
Yeah.
for yourself. And so
Right.
sometimes people will do those types of things because have felt shame because that's how their mother always treated them for not being the way that they wanted them to be.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and for those that are struggling in just around the awareness of emotions, because it can be a confusing thing, especially if you do have a lot of trauma and you do become dysregulated easily. Um, Sometimes the behaviors can give you clues as to what's really going on with you. So I have a
Mhm.
couple of, there are many times in my relationship with my wife where we would be in a conflict and she would be like, well, you're clearly angry at me. And I'm like, I'm not angry. And she would be like, okay, well, you're feeling the need to defend yourself. And I'm like, yeah, because I feel as though you are attacking me. And, but when you actually, like, the reality of what an emotion does is it does motivate you to do something. So shame motivates you to give up and hide. in like anger, for example, in the example I was talking about, anger actually does motivate you to defend yourself. So if you are feeling defensive, you most likely are feeling angry,
Mm,
and it's okay because you are feeling attacked or whatever.
yeah.
So, if this is kind of new to you in terms of really digging in and understanding yourself,
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to all the three things we just mentioned and the behaviors that you're showing, the thoughts you're having, the emotions that are going on. And then on top of it all, the physical, right?
Yep.
So I,
For me,
yeah,
it's some of the things that I see are stomach issues and back pain. I mean, stress in general. A lot of times we'll go to the back, and then also shame tends to go there as well. Stress, headaches, just being tired, just being ill all the time.
yeah, that if you get that pit and that pain in the pit of your stomach, that's
Mm,
that's a window to shame.
yeah.
And then for me, some of the physical actions that I'm doing, because when I am dysregulated in the moment, I literally have no clue kind of about a lot of what's deeper in that, because I am dysregulated. But like when I start to like cover my face, and I'm like, that's a sign of stress. But sometimes when I'm like literally like, like I want to physically dive down and hide, you know, and that's a good clue to me. Like, okay, what are you feeling ashamed about, Cate? You cannot
Mhm.
roll into a ball. It's physically impossible. So, let's back up and figure out what's going on here.
Yeah. So Stephanie had something she wanted to piggyback on. She says, and to piggyback
Yes.
on the effects of guilt, narcissist will pick up on that and target them. It's
Yeah.
a big part of their game, shifting guilt. I love
Yes.
that, Stephanie. And the person I'm
That
thinking of and knows that that's exactly what happens in that mother relationship.
yes. And that's what we call an invalidating environment.
Yes.
So, and that is one of the justified things, like the shame can be somewhat justified. And one of the only times it is when you have been invalidated. Like
Mm,
someone is literally telling you, feel ashamed.
mhm,
You should feel ashamed, or those feelings you have are
mhm,
not okay. Like, so if you are actively being invalidated, like something, it's like from someone that is maybe a narcissist or someone else, or an environment itself is invalidating you,
yeah.
um, of course you're going to feel shame.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people, sort of the Me Too era, is a lot of people weren't believed, and that in itself is invalidating people.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so maybe let's talk a little bit about the shame spiral. You started to hit upon this, and so we have a little
Yes.
graphic. I want to thank whoever Self Love Rainbow is. And so this was a graphic that we found that really sort of epitomized the shame spiral.
Yes. And as the other thing that this graphic does for me is it takes something that is when you actually look at the words and look at what it's telling you, this funnel, it's not a pretty thing to think about, right? But this is a beautiful graphic. Like
I know.
I like look at this and I'm like, oh, what a lovely shame spiral it is. So I also really liked that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But it is, if you as you look at this is, how you um get from a place of an event that leads you down the path of shaming yourself and
Mhm.
where that leads to and how dangerous and destructive that can be.
Yeah, so a lot of times there's a trigger. There's some
Mhm.
type of something
Event.
that happens, yep, that you are now starting to feel, whether it's embarrassment or guilt or immediately shame, but that then spirals and now becomes a feeling that you can't do anything right. You're always going to be a failure, and this is one of the things that our upcoming person that's going to be on the show, this is one of the things that they dealt with. And then all of a sudden you think, well, everybody, feels this way. And
If
then
I'm feeling this about myself, I mean, everyone else is too.
And then as Cate was talking about, and then she justified it. Oh, see here, I'm finding the evidence to make my thoughts real. Yep, see, I'm validating it through that. And then it's retracting, you're isolating, you're withdrawing. Then that's when you continue on down the cycle of now you're feeling helpless and hopeless and dealing with depression and anxiety.
Yeah. The middle parts, the yellow and the pink there in that funnel downward, that's your rumination stage, right? That's when you just can't fucking let something go inside your head, even though you may know it's irrational, or perhaps you should know it's irrational, but you have done yourself a disservice by leaning into your own judgments and then assuming everyone else has those judgments and then putting on judgment glasses to see all of this other evidence that of course that's true.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to keep it up. We're going to talk a little bit about common reasons for shame, but also getting into like things that you can do. And if you notice on the side, this actually talks about things that you can do to try to deal with that shame spiral. But some of the common reasons for shame, we've sort of talked about a lot of these. But maybe Cate, we can point out some that we tend to see a lot. Maybe just some key ones.
Yep. There's all, I think a big one is when you're betrayed by someone you love. I don't know of anyone who has been cheated on, for example, that has not felt shame. And they didn't decide to cheat, they lived up to their monogamous commitment, but they were betrayed, and it's really hard when someone you love betrays you to not think it's because of you.
Yeah.
And then that invalidation, that's a thing that sometimes people, they know, like, this narcissist was in my life and did this, but being invalidated for a long period of time, is a real problem.
Yeah. For me, I think that sometimes it's also the rejection. So being rejected by people that you care about. So when you think about people that you really love and feeling rejected, so like even going through a divorce or dealing with things maybe potentially with your parents, or maybe friends are rejecting you. So you start to think, what's wrong with me? Why does nobody, want to be around me?
Yep.
Yeah,
definitely. So there's lots of common reasons for shame. And sometimes people literally are attacking your integrity. And that can cause you to feel shame. And that's a justified feeling of shame. Sometimes the shame isn't justified, right? But there are times, like if somebody is actively invalidating you, actively rejecting you, actively attacking you, you're justified in feeling shame. That environment is reinforcing it. Then you have a choice. Am I going to let this shame spiral, or am I going to meet it head on?
Right.
Work on your self-talk, forgive your mistakes, find other ways to deal with it.
So Cate, you're already hitting upon tactics to sort of release shame. So let's dive into it.
Yeah. So I have a few tactics because, as I've talked about this before, I have a very, very, positive, hopeful personality in the majority of the time. But if something does go wrong, I will very fastly slip into a place of, well, I'm a failure and the world would probably be better off without me. Right. And so I needed to get a grasp on that quick thought change. I really needed to get a grasp on that, because having that pattern my entire life did lead to points when the spiral then came became so large and consuming that I did make attempts and I did do really harmful things to myself and the people around me. So I needed some tactics that I could do soon. When I first get that initial thought, when I have that flip that seems, totally insane, I needed something that I could do immediately. So there's a couple of tactics that have worked really well for me. I've talked about checking the facts before, but for me, being an analytical person to some degree, it's really helpful for me to literally kind of pause and say, okay, let's go back and actually check the facts. Is this true? And when I say check the facts, what you're actually trying to do is you're analyzing the thoughts and emotions you're having about it. So it's like when you're feeling ashamed, you are most likely catastrophizing something. If I were to be public about this, this will happen and then this will happen and it will be horrible, and when you move into a pattern of wanting to address it and prevent it, you're checking the facts to say, okay, is that really going to happen? Are those irrational things that you're thinking about really going to happen? So that's checking the facts. And I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that. My other tactic that is my favorite tactic is opposite action. This is a DBT skill. And it's weird, but because you literally, when you're in that really awful place of shame, you have no inclination to do anything positive, right? So if you can remember the words opposite action and tell yourself to do exactly the opposite of what you are wanting to do, it's a fake it till you make it type of an approach. It's why affirmations work, right? So like if I want to hide and run away and I tell myself, okay, what is the opposite action here? And okay, the opposite action is to lean in, to run into the direction of where I want to hide. And push yourself through that. That's that's what I essentially did with the fear that I was feeling about kind of becoming public about those types of things is you see it, you acknowledge it, but you decide to do it anyway. You're taking the opposite action of what your urge is to do. You're telling yourself, no, that urge isn't healthy, and I'm going to just go ahead and do exactly the opposite and fake it till I make it. And at the end, you invariably always feel better.
Yeah. And so, some of the things that you can ask yourself are, what's the emotion I want to change? Then
What
focusing on, and then what prompted my emotion? What are my thoughts and assumptions about what happened? And then am I assuming a threat? And this was the most interesting as Cate and I went through this together, because a lot of times when you think about a threat, it's really a fear. So what am I assuming might happen? So for example, if someone is threatening to expose something private about you, or someone is saying that they're going to do a certain action, you think about the narcissist that Stephanie was talking about earlier. What is it that what is the threat that I'm assuming? What is my fear? So in Cate's example of coming public with all of this information, her fear was that she was going to be judged. She was going to basically feel that she was exposing herself up to potential criticism, and that people were going to start to think differently about her. And so whenever I asked her, I was like, okay, so Cate, I'm like, so what would have, happened? Like,
right.
What is the real impact of people thinking differently about you?
Right. The only impact is that felt weird to me. That felt awkward. But was there a catastrophe waiting on the other side of it? In reality, no. Right? But it just didn't feel comfortable. But there's a difference between, discomfort and a real, situation of chaos or catastrophe, right?
Yeah. And I have found that by me taking control and power over what it is that I want to have released, I've just taken the power away from anybody else that wants to try to shame me
Right.
about something.
Yep.
And that's what I love about, situations that I've seen where someone's like blackmailing someone and they're like, guess what, everybody, here's what happened to me. Here's what I did. I'm not proud of it. Here are the things that I focused on, but now they just took away their ability to even blackmail them. And so I'm like,
Right.
oh, I love that situation, those type of situations.
Exactly. And just, and we're at our hour, but I mean,
Mhm.
it's now come full circle, because when you can take back your power,
Mhm.
that's being a badass.
It
That
is.
is badassery at its finest. So when you can face shame head on and take back your power, you've done it. You're there. You've reached the badass place.
Exactly. And that's really what all of this is about, is
Yeah.
to find your power in whatever the situation is. Sometimes it's working on you in order to get there, but then it's also taking control
Right.
over all of the things that you're feeling, your emotions in life.
Yeah. I would really love to hear more feedback from our audience around whether this hit the mark, or what else you would want to talk about. This is such a deep
Mhm.
issue, in my opinion. I think there could be 10 different episodes we could do, all on different aspects of this.
Mhm.
But obviously we want, it to be relatable and powerful and valuable for you all. So if you have any more feedback, if you're like, oh wow, that was really cool, but I'd love to dig in deeper around this,
Mhm.
please let us know.
Yeah. And so Renee says, such a great episode today. Thank you. Stephanie
Wow.
had asked if we could share the graphics, so I'll be sure to post that out to the different groups so you guys can have that. And I just, Cate, I appreciate you getting vulnerable with me each week and releasing these different things. I hope that you feel proud of yourself for
Oh,
being able to do that.
I do, I do. I got every week when we finish with this, Sarah, I feel so fucking good. Even though sometimes we are talking about some deep, bad shit,
Yeah,
God, I feel great. I
I know.
feel like a badass when
I
we
know.
when we get done, and that's what it's all about. And I thank you for always being such a strong advocate for vulnerability in general, but for creating this platform for people, and for continuing to want to help.
Yeah.
You're awesome.
I appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about, is just helping people. The shit that we've dealt with, people are dealing with it in different ways. And that is what I have found. And so
Yeah.
we just continue to work together and grow together, learn from each other, realize we're going to make mistakes along the way. And that's okay too.
Mhm.
And we'll just continue to fuel your Friday, as Kate always says. And
Yes.
so I appreciate everybody joining us today. Kim, we'll end it with you. Love you, ladies. You're both amazing. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah. Have a badass weekend. Have a fueled up Friday, and kick some butt next week. And I love you all. Thank you.
Thank you.